Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to a host of podcasts here, the Sprout University podcast, Thomas's podcast, and Josh's podcast. We have a really timely and great episode today. We're going to be discussing death, and you might hear that, and some fear might arise, or some confusion, questioning what does this mean? Like, why are you guys talking about this? And really, what we're going to be diving into today is how understanding death is a really important facet into living your best life. And I know we've all experienced death here. I'm sure many of you have too, whether it be a family member, loved one, pet, animal. And what I found personally is that each time I've experienced a death, and in the moment it's very painful, but afterwards there's, in a sense, a rebirth, and I become a better person. And so that's kind of what we're going to be diving into. So first off, I want to welcome Thomas, the professional wingman. Thanks for tuning in today, brother.
Yeah, happy to be here, bro.
Yeah. And his partner in crime, his doppelganger, the renegade wingman. This is a special moment having the two shenanigan makers on the podcast today. So welcome, Josh.
Yeah, no, thanks, sir. Thanks for having me. And yeah, always good to have a good discussion with you, but also with one of my various partners in crime, Thomas, who I've personally learned a lot from. And so, yeah, as you can tell, he's the professional. I'm more of the renegade. So I think it suits us well.
Yeah,
it does.
That's
it
for
does.
Another podcast. So cool. We will dive right in as always, guys. So actually, Josh, why don't you take us away here? And this is a very timely episode from what you share with us. So feel free to dive into that if you'd like. And
no, I'll definitely say this is a very timely episode. Just because last night my grandmother actually passed away. So she's 95, and so one of those things that it wasn't unexpected, so had the proper amount of time to say goodbyes and just make the preparations for it. But again, a good solemn reminder of, hey, eventually on a long enough time scale, we all will go through this and experience it. But when you come to face with your mortality, that really is kind of liberating and very freeing, because you suddenly start to realize that no matter what it is that I do, eventually I'm going to wind up, 6 feet under. So if there's something that I'm afraid to do, or, a challenge that I don't think I can surmise, it's like, hey, you know what? Might as well go all out, go all for it. Because again, worst case scenario, you're still, you're here, and you still got to figure out, things and go through this life and navigate it how best you can. But, understanding that, hey, there is a timetable. We only have a certain amount of time left. That is very, very liberating, because again, if there's any fear or doubt or something around something that you want to do, or something you want to pursue, or something you want to try, it lets you really put things in perspective and just say, yeah, why not try it? Again, I only got a limited amount of time on this earth, so you may as well make the most out of it. And so that, to me, is kind of the meaning of life, is, spending the time that matters most with the people that kind of matter most. And so really making the most in the use of this time, because there's often times where just like, oh, well, I got all the time in the world, or, I just don't feel like, making the most out of this day, but you don't know how much time you really have left. So it's always good to have that kind of reminder of like, hey, clock's ticking. So, as Elon Musk said, no amount of money in the world ever bought back a second of time. So, each one that goes by, you want to make sure that you're getting the good use out of it.
Wow, man, that hit home for sure. Absolutely. It's we can never get our time back. And how you said it is really powerful, because so many people, including myself, have fallen into these patterns where we just chase the money, chase the relationship, and just always forgetting that, even if we get what we want, one day it's going to be gone. Whether that's through, let's say, a relationship, for example. I know, Thomas, you talk about that on your channel, where you meet the girl of your dreams, right? She's going to get old one day. Her skin's going to get nice and wrinkly. She's going to lose that tight little body you maybe fell in love with. So I guess, Thomas, for you, how is embracing death, learning about death, change your relationship with your life and all the
above? I have a much more intimate relationship with death than I used to. I used to be really afraid of death. And it was weird, because the death that I now know of was very different from the death that I used to know. I just even hearing Josh talk about it, It goes back to my grandma, and she died of breast cancer. I was in my early 20s, and I wasn't in a space to really understand the process of grief and death. I mean, I'm in my early 20s, right? Like I'm invincible, right? That's my mentality in my early 20s. And any guy out there can relate to that. You know, you're just getting started, if you will, in your mindset. So the idea to create space for death didn't really compute with me. It didn't make sense. And you know, then when I was struggling in my life and I had my dark night of the soul and my white light experience, you know, the only thing I could think of it as is a death. I had the ultimate death, and then was born again the next day, living in a completely different world with new point of views, new things accessible to me, old things inaccessible to me. And that began my journey to truly understand what I always like to call like the daily death. Right. Every day I wake up, I'm a new version of myself who it does not know what this world will bring that day, you know, and getting comfortable with that and knowing that the idea of growth is about death. You know, so many things that we experience in our lives is about death, right? Gradual commencement. The word itself means the death of something and the beginning of another, right? You know, funerals are designed to be celebration of life. Right. And that's in a time when people are not alive. And so we constantly are faced with this, you know, all the time, and we run away from it. I certainly did. And I remember I was watching Limitless with Chris Hemsworth on Nat Geo / Disney Plus. And his last episode was all about the acceptance of death. And for a long time, my biggest, fear of death was losing my parents. And I know that's going to eventually happen, right? But I was just afraid of it, was unwilling to look at it. And when I saw that episode, for some reason, my ability to process my parents' death happened in a moment's notice. And what uncovered was the real fear, which was my own death. My own death, and looking and assessing, if I were to die like right now, would I die satisfied, peaceful, and fulfilled, knowing that I did everything I possibly could do to leave a life that I wanted to live? And the answer was no. And that shifted for me. And along the same lines of what Josh was saying, it changed how I thought about things. I don't want to wait. I don't want to put things off, because we all have an expiration date and we don't know when it is, but we all do. I have a friend who's trying to live to 150. Amazing. I think he'll do it, right? But even then, he still has an expiration date, right? So how are we going to maximize this time? How will we actually do that? And I'm certainly not looking to waste any of it.
That Josh guy, right? Trying to live to 150, man. What a rascal.
I'm in for 180, guys. What are you talking about?
man, right on the point there, Thomas. It's my follow-up question to you actually is, and both of you guys, you talked about the dark night of the soul. So it sounded to me maybe there was fear not only of the physical death, but of the ego death, of the spiritual death. What does that mean to you guys, as you guys both have gone through transformations of inner self as well, not just on the physical?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do is that sometimes in order to be who you're meant to be, you have to let who you currently are die in order to become that. Because sometimes who you currently are wants to hold too much onto certain things. And so it's like this thing that my friend sent me yesterday, which I was like, kind of profound timing. But it said, the past doesn't need you anymore. Your future does. And so really it's kind of that call of, oftentimes we get comfortable or complacent into like a certain, who we are in a certain moment. Right. And so it's good. And there's nothing wrong with hey, getting to a new level and everything. But life is kind of about continuously pushing forward, expanding those boundaries and reaching new levels of limitations. And so, if we get too comfortable at a certain area, we suddenly start to find that things are slipping or certainly falling apart or not working out for us, or we're getting frustrated. And so we have to kind of let go of who we are right now in order to become, that person that's, hey, going to go that extra mile, or hey, that person that's going to think about a problem more differently or more creatively. So, and that can be tough sometimes, because sometimes we get so wrapped up in, well, I did X, Y, and Z that got me here. And, I want to just be able to ride this success out forever. But that's, life is a very quantum and dynamic environment. So, everything that you did yesterday to get you to where you are today is not going to be the things that are going to continue to push you forward into tomorrow. So it just gets, can be hard and frustrating sometimes, especially when it's like, you think you've mastered everything, or you think you've like cracked it and solved the code, and then life throws something new at you and you realize it's like, oh, okay, no, there's new levels or new secrets about myself that I have to learn. And for me, I like it because it's a good learning opportunity. But definitely had to, my younger days had to, reconcile that, okay, everything that you did yesterday that got you in the door today is not going to be a thing that's going to carry you forward and keep you here tomorrow. And so that gets a little bit tough, because you're like, oh, I was like, invincible, and I was amazing, and I was this, and this. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's cool. But, that doesn't mean anything for what's going on right now, or for where you want to get to. So that's the kind of the takeaway, where it's that opportunity of like, oh, okay, I now get the challenge to push myself and really see what I'm capable of. That's the stage that I'm at now, where I'm just like more embrace the challenge, and I'm willing to be like, okay, I gotta, or even in relationships, definitely learn that lesson very difficultly in some past relationships, where it's like, you let your ego run the show a little bit too much, and then you suddenly realize like, oh, okay, yeah, I gotta, take my ego out back behind the car, shoot it in the back of the head, drive it out into the desert, kind of bury it a little bit somewhere, because sometimes, hey, it can do good things and help you push forward. But if it runs rampant or run amok, then what it winds up doing is it keeps you stuck in certain places and then lets things fall to the wayside.
Yeah, man, bro. That has to be as well. I mean, the hardest part for me about death as well is like when things are just, you're balling, right? Things are going well, business is working well, relationships are working well. And then the universe says, hey, you got to deal with this. And all of a sudden, none of that matters anymore. So I like how you said, like, your mindset behind it, just you're embracing the new journey and the new challenge, instead of looking at it as like, oh man, something bad happened to me, etc. Thomas, the short I just edited for you half hour ago was about the rear view mirror, your analogy, and how you don't want to look in the rear view mirror. You want to look at the windshield, and you have your whole life ahead of you. So can you maybe share about that and like what that means to you?
Yeah. And I love what Josh, said, the past doesn't need you anymore. The future does, and in recovery programs, you often hear, we don't wish to close the door. We don't regret the past, but we don't wish to shut the door on it, because in there lies the lessons and the remembering of who we used to be, in order to help us propel forward to who we feel we're meant to be, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it is important to check the rearview mirror every so often to see how far we've come. We forget that, like when we are in the pursuit of our own greatness, we don't realize that studies have proven this. When we're in the pursuit of something that we think is going to make our lives better, we're actually unhappy during the pursuit. And when we finally achieve it, there's a spike that occurs. And people think that this spike is because we've actually acquired it. That's part of it. The truth is, we are so unhappy on the cusp of actually that achievement that it spikes us our unhappiness. But so what does it have to do with death? Well, in order for us to become the person that we want to be, that experiences that achievement, the person that we used to be has to die. We've heard this said already on this podcast. And that is an unhappy experience. And when we die, that version of ourselves, there's a grief process that takes place. And I don't know about you, but I find in my history that a lot of people handle grief in various ways. I tend to live more in the denial and the anger of that grief process than I do on the other side, where there's the acceptance and in the lifting process. And so, the importance of being able to see where you're going, to see where you've come from, is important. And there's a reason why the windshield is much bigger, right? Because you need to be clear on where you're going and focus on that. Now, in regards to the ego, I think the one thing that I would say I would disagree with Josh with is the idea of trying to kill the ego. I don't think the ego can die. Like I'm of the faith that even Gandhi himself had an ego, because you needed an ego in order to pull off what he did, right? And so this idea of like the ultimate ego death, I think, is not something that can be experienced. I mean, it's probably a 1 in a billion chance that you can live in this existence and not have an ego. So not to say that you shouldn't strive for it, right? But just accepting the odds of that not happening, what I've discovered is that I think the ego has a place, as Josh said, right? It has a place because it allows us to be safe. It's the part that gives us the confidence to do what we need to do. It's the part that allows us to be spontaneous and be responsive when things kind of either come awry or something, a new opportunity shows up. But I think a big mistake a lot of people have is that they let their ego be at the head of the table.
Yeah.
You know, they let the ego become the person that runs the house, right? And I've been in that experience too. And I literally had to do a part work experience where I had to sit at different seats and play the roles of the different versions of me that was running in my head. It felt like I was like losing it. But what I understood from that was there are parts of me that run my life. And the part that I don't want at the head of the table is the ego. But I also don't want to shame and shun the ego, because it does have an important role in my life. Doing this podcast is one of the things that my ego actually allows me to do. So to try to kill it off doesn't actually feel productive for the life that I want to live. So what I do is I give it a seat at the table, just not the head. And when his number is called, I get excited about it because I know he'll come through. He is automated. He is programmed to deliver what he's designed to deliver. He doesn't even have a consciousness. So I don't have to worry about him having to think about whether or not it's the right thing to do. He's just going to act because that's how the ego is designed, right? But
yes,
there are these moments where when you have your soul at the head of the table, that person's going to have the final say. And the ego might be resistant to that. And that's where the death occurs. Now, the ego, and I'm going along with this because I think this part is really important. The ego, its program is, I don't want to die. Right? The ego does not want to die, and it'll do everything it possibly can. Now, remember, I said it doesn't have a conscience, so it doesn't actually realize that it needs a host to exist, but it's willing to even kill its host in order for it to survive. Right? So anyone who's suffering in addiction or some type of deep depression or other forms of clinical mental illness, or not clinical, this is something that can happen, right? The ego doesn't want to die, so it's doing everything it can to protect itself, even if it means killing the host itself. Mm-hmm. But the soul wants to live. The soul wants to be free, right? And what I've learned is both actually want the same thing. It's kind of like Neo and Smith in the Matrix, right? Like, you in the first Matrix, you actually hear Smith say that he wants to be free. It's actually the only time he says it in the whole series. But that's why he's doing what he does, because he wants to be free. And what does Neo want to do? Neo wants to free minds, right? But because of how they're programming, they went about it in completely different directions. So what we got to do is, and how this relates to death, is the ego needs to not realize it's dying. That's the key, right? If your soul can convince your ego to come along for the ride that it's taking itself, that you're taking it on, the ego won't realize that it's dying. A little piece of itself is being left behind as it follows along on this journey. And that's a really, really, I almost think like it's an eternal process that we go through. And I think that's really where the ego can die and still live in its purpose.
Yeah, I like the way that you phrased that, which I think was, you phrased what I was trying to say a lot better. So I definitely appreciate the way that you put that out there, because, it's true. The ego is a very useful, essential part of yourself. It's just sometimes the ego needs to be reminded of, like, it works for you, not the other way around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the ego too, like you said it, both of you guys said it, the ego wants pleasure. That's what it's seeking out for. And we're also seeking out pleasure. We want peace and happiness. When you look at it from like an evolutionary standpoint too, like our ego is designed to keep us from getting eaten by like a tiger. So there is a very important purpose in it. It's just that today, because we've advanced in our consciousness, we have so many other things around us now, it can easily get, distracted by the shiny object syndrome, relationships, money, all that stuff. Thomas, when you were sharing that about the parts, that's exactly what I was thinking of when Josh, you initially said that, shoot him from behind the car there. Very dark analogy. I had the same mindset for a long time. I was like, I have to kill my ego. Like, my ego's bad. It's an enemy. And once I started doing the parts therapy, which Thomas, you alluded on, and guys, if you're watching this, you don't know what that is, take a look. There's a book called Parts, which really does a great job at describing it. And essentially, we have all these little parts of us that have been fractured through trauma throughout our lives. So anytime our parents yelled at us when we were a kid, a girl rejected us at school, a friend said, I don't want to be your friend anymore, part of us would split off. Maybe not everyone, but I know for me anyway, I split off a lot, and I created all these different like identities to protect myself from having that happen again. And so there's all these different parts of myself from different ages kind of running around in my head, running around in my consciousness. And the problem was that I didn't know who I was because I had all these parts that were unhealed. So with parts therapy, you just do that. You say like, all right, everyone, you're welcome to come into my office. There's a circle of chairs or however you want to visualize it. And you talk to each part of yourself, each part that has been hurt, each part that, just wants love and attention, that in a sense you abandoned, not in a malicious way, but just because when an event happened, it was like, okay, it's that part's fault that this happened. I can't be associated with this part anymore. A great analogy is like when anyone grows up and they want to be the cool kid, right? They were like a nerd. Like that's kind of what I went through. Like I shamed my nerd. I was like, I'm not the nerd anymore. I was never a nerd. Nerds are losers or whatever. But that nerd was always inside. And when I got older, I'm like, the nerd was coming out and I'm like, whoa, I'm supposed to be the cool guy. Why is this nerdy self coming out? So I wasn't integrated. Basically, the point of parts therapy then you learn how to integrate all those parts together. You learn how to have the cool part love the nerdy part, for example, or the jock love the little kid that was terrible at sports. You learn to like have harmony, and then the energy, the pain goes away from those experiences, which is the best part, and then you become more of an integrated person. So this is a really powerful exercise. I recommend everybody try it out. Whenever it feels right for you. It's a big part of the recovery process as well, learning how to find peace with those parts. Thomas, for example, you were an ex-partier, let's just say that. So you probably had a moment where you had to make peace with the part of you that caused dysfunction, caused pain in the lives of others. And then Josh will have a follow-up for you as well, because you were the opposite. If anyone didn't know, Josh didn't start drinking till 30, which is nuts.
It is related to death though, so we'll detail into that.
Cool. Hell yeah.
It's interesting how it can affect people in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So Thomas, we'll start with you. What was that process of making peace with your party self?
Yeah. That process started the moment I found out I was going to be a dad. I've always wanted to be a dad. I remember being a teenager thinking about the idea of being a dad, and when that day came, I always say it was the worst, best day of my life because, the best day for obvious reasons, right? But the worst day was because that identity of being the partier, the life of the party, and this young, charismatic socialite died. I call my ego Wingman. And so Wingman died, at least my perception of him died that day. And I spent, the next year and a half plus actively mourning the death of that identity, right? Like I couldn't handle the grief. This is what I was talking about before in terms of how we process grief in any type of death. Because here we are, my daughter's coming and it's a celebration of a birth of life. And here I am mourning a death, right? And the death was of my identity and I didn't handle it well. But then
Thomas, how did you not handle it well? I'm very curious.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I would constantly, I didn't know how to, first of all, I wasn't able to process my emotions, right? I couldn't identify them as I'm able to now. And I couldn't process them. right? So the overwhelm, I just didn't want to feel that. So I self-medicated, right? I would go out, I would drink, I would party, I would stay up late, I would avoid everything that made me get back to the reality, which was I'm having a hard time with this, with this juxtaposition of being a dad and also being a wingman. And so I struggled with that a lot. And it wasn't until towards the end of my, substance abuse run that I started to get outside support, right? Through therapy and eventually recovery. And inside of my sobriety, I had the opportunity, and I continue to. Here's the thing, right? Like that part of you that, like I said, I call it wingman, my ego, because it doesn't die. There's always going to be things that show up in your life that's going to give you the opportunity to heal something that was once a wound, right? So we talk about death and life. The same process occurs from wound to healing. Mm-hmm. And I had to, when I first got sober, I completely distanced myself from anything wingman related. I just didn't want to do it because I felt like I had to do that to preserve any chance of me living physically, right? Like it just was too toxic for me at that level. But then over time, it got to the point where I was like, okay, like I need to have this conversation with wingman. I need to facilitate this and come to a way of embracing both, the way that you just described it, Joel, right? It's like kind of like the charismatic guy with the responsibility guy. That's really kind of where it came from, right? It's like if I were to kind of simplify it, a guy who's really responsible, who's loving, who has a great family, who takes care of his family, who provides, protects, loves on them. And then there's this like outgoing, charismatic, life of the party, easy to connect with, knows what to say, how to say it, to get in the right places, to connect people, right? Those two people can coexist. I just didn't know how at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until I allowed that conversation to take place where I got to actually hear what both parts of me needed. Mm-hmm. Right. And the responsibility one just didn't want to screw up. Mm-hmm. That's what he was afraid of. Wingman wanted to be validated, for better lack of terms, right? It's just wanted to be validated, wanted to be acknowledged, wanted the impact. And so I had to sit down and have the conversation with the two of them, kind of come to like a collaborative agreement where we can leverage each other's strengths to live the ultimate life, where I can still be charismatic and I can still be outgoing and social and have a good time. And I could still be a protector and provider and lover of my family and be an amazing dad to an amazing, girl and being a loving husband, like those things can coexist. I just didn't think that was possible until I had the conversation. And I think for me, that became a big death, right? Which was the idea that the story that those two things couldn't coexist died the moment I had that conversation. And it changed a lot for me in my life.
Wow, man, that is hella powerful, dude. I feel the relief that came from it, right?
Yeah.
When you let go of your toxic from Josh and you said, okay, I got to grow up. A real adult. No more wingman.
Well, the word renegade, personified.
Yeah. But the best part though is like Josh and I have gone out, it's since the kind of the merging of the two, right? And we still have incredible times and stories to tell, right? Like we still get into shenanigans and have a great time, but it's not from the place where only wingman thrives off of that. Because when the ego, when your ego is unchecked and it has no boundaries, I call it the ultra ego, right? And so your ultra ego, it's almost like I'm going to throw some old school stuff here. So anyone remembers Darkwing Duck, the cartoon back in the day, right? Like Negaduck was literally the antithesis of Darkwing Duck, right? Like that was his ultra ego, right? Completely unchecked. So, for me, that was mine. Mine was the guy who had no boundaries, was excessive with everything that he did, whether it was partying, drinking, socializing, staying up late, energy, the next move, whatever it was. I wanted to be the first guy, the first guy in, last guy out kind of vibe, right? And so when this loving, protective, calm, stoic, provider, these characteristics started to merge, that was when I started to realize, oh shit, like I think even wingman, like both parts of me leveled up at the same time, right? Because now I have all of these strengths at my disposal, and I think it just made me a much more complete person.
I love that, man. You said it right there. You came together, and it's such a good story. I can really relate to it. As I was hearing it, I'm reflecting back on some things that I need to have conversations with on a couple parts of myself as well, because there's I'll just share with you guys, like, for me, money is a big, I guess, ego. It's a big part of my ego. Grew up in a very scarce mindset, so we never had enough. And so as I'm learning financial discipline and stuff, I relate just like you. Like, I'm a very financially responsible person. That's an ego, I guess, but that's how I view myself. And recently I came into a situation, Josh knows, where I'm gonna have to pay a little bit of money. And so my whole identity of this, like, guy that doesn't owe people money and he's just on top of his financial game is been shattered. And it's been just interesting to watch it play out in my actual life, because I'm going on dates. I'm less confident. I'm noticing that, and I'm just watching myself like get nervous over just little things that a few weeks ago, until I realized this was happening, I didn't care about. So where the work comes in then is like, okay, I got to have that conversation with myself. Just like you, the part that was very irresponsible and that, spent lavishly when it didn't have it. And then the part now that is very financially responsible and does take care of what it needs to take care of and doesn't do that anymore. Somehow find that union between the two, because like you said, they both want the same thing. They're both a part of me. And I think when I get to have that conversation and allow them to like give each other a hug, basically, like, hey man, like, I don't blame you. And you're right, I don't blame you. I'm not afraid of you. There's going to be a lot of peace. So I appreciate that, Thomas. And I think that's it's a very powerful exercise that you just walked us through, basically, of that making peace with the negaduck and the kind duck. So I just looked up negaduck too, and that thing looks it's a pretty badass character.
It is, right?
Honest,
yeah. And I part of it was inspired by my therapist. My therapist had taught me a cognitive behavioral therapeutic technique that helped me take a look at my stories. What was the programs in my head that were running my life? Right? We do all have stories based on beliefs, values, and experiences that govern our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And so I took a look at it, and I got the chance to pick it apart and understand a lot of those things. And then I was like, what if I could legitimately facilitate a conversation between my soul and my ego to help get an understanding of what both of them want, and maybe come to some collaborative agreement that allows both to move forward. Because if I don't, my ego, as Josh alluded to, like, will self-sabotage. It'll sabotage my efforts. And I don't want that to happen, right? And so I ended up constructing, basically a journal with specific prompts that guide you through the process of allowing your ego to express itself when it's feeling triggered, and understand, what is really desired here out of this situation, so that way you can collaborate towards a different story that you can have run your life that's going to be more productive. Like, it's called the Power Up Journal, and my clients use it all the time, and they love it, because when we get triggered, it's our ego that takes over, right? Our ego pushes our soul out from the head of the table and tries to drive the bus, right?
Right.
What was that movie? Inside Out, right? So when you see the movie and the guy, who represents anger, right? He's always the one that's like pushing everyone out of the way, and he's like, anger, right? Like that sometimes happens to be the thing that takes over. So when you can find a moment to pause and journal about what triggered that, right? Because it wasn't the experience that triggered it. It was the thought based on the narrative, based on the experience, that then triggered the feelings and behaviors. And when you can intercept that, a lot of amazing things can happen, right? And I feel like having that journal and having that process actually accelerated what I call the daily death, because there were stories that I got to let go, not even realizing that they were running my life as it pertained to my relationships, whether it came to money, my health, business, right? All these factors were led based on stories that did not serve me. And then I got an opportunity to get rid of them and create new ones in place. Because you got to make new ones in place. You can't just empty the hard drive, because then eventually, that very thing will come back in and take over the spot. So you got to replace it with something and start to find evidence to support it being there to be able to move forward.
Oh, right, dude. That's a huge part. Yeah. That was a big insight right there. I was just like, yeah, because I'm always trying to empty it, but then it's like the new thing is just like nothing. It's like, you're right. You got to add something new. So I want to transition.
Death without life, right?
Yep.
So we can't just like have death, period, right? Like that's not that's not a really great way to live life, right? And so there has to be the other side that's available. And so in this case, like, we remove what's not serving and we put in what can.
It's got to be a birth. Oh, amen to that. So same kind of sentiment to you, Josh. What was has been a few maybe of your transitions out of the old to the new, and going through some of the processes that Thomas has gone through?
I mean, I've lived a very interesting life, so there's death for sure has been a large part of it. I mean, personally, I've almost died 7 times. So there's like 7 times where it's like, okay, this is the end. And then that radically changes and shifts your perspective on stuff, where you're like, when you're confronted with it, suddenly you realize that 90% of what you worry about in your day-to-day doesn't matter whatsoever. So it really focuses you in on that 10% of that stuff that actually matters. So that to me is, something that I've always been considered myself very fortunate to have that perspective on things. And then, I would definitely say that when it comes to that personal transformation, what you really, really want to really focus and hone in on is you really want to just take kind of accountability for, okay, how did I wind up in this situation? What happened in this situation? How do I react to it? Because life really is like 90% what happens to you, 10% 10% what happens to you, 90% like how you respond and react to it. So, there's definitely been a lot of very firsthand kind of reminders of the mortality. And so for myself, a lot of that has come down to, realizing either A, where am I, or how did I get here into the situation? And not necessarily looking for like fault or someone to blame, but just coming to that mindset of like, hey, we're here in the situation, and it kind of doesn't matter like, whose quote unquote fault it is or whatever. Here's the situation. Here's how I wound up in it. How do I move forward, or how do I progress and become better, right? Or get out of the situation or avoid it in the future. So, to Thomas's point, it's a very much cyclical. Like, if you really think about it, you can't have death supports and sustains life, right? You eat food, something was alive, and then it's no longer alive because it's feeding you and sustaining you. So that's the very cyclical nature of things. So you just have to really understand that cycle, but also to take more stock and accountability into, okay, where exactly am I? Where do I want to be? And how can I facilitate getting there? Because again, death is going to be a very huge part of life, and it's going to affect you in very different ways. Sometimes you're not prepared for it. Other times you do have some preparation for it. But, always use it as a good reminder just to value and appreciate the time that you have with the people that you have while you have it. Because, again, I've, lost quite a few people along the way. So kind of going back to what I alluded to earlier, why I didn't start drinking until I was 30 was when I was in high school. I had a good friend of mine who, he was killed by a drunk driver. So 17 years old. Out doing some, out looking at different colleges and whatnot. And we're talking about, oh, you're going to go to this college, whatever. And then boom, trying to cross the street, and drunk guy ran a red light. So, it's one of those things when you're like kind of 16, right? It leaves a very profound impact and an influence on you. But then, you have other things where, over the last probably 10 years, right? I mean, I've just had my grandmother die, right? My grandfather died a few years ago. Before that, my uncle died. Before that, in 2020, I had a good college friend of mine He died where, again, 35, went to sleep, didn't wake up because he had aneurysm at night. So it's like you just don't know like when the timing is going to come and when your number is going to be up, but also when the people that are in your life, right, when that number is going to be up. So that's why it's really important to kind of make the most of each day. But also I'd say like just when life really starts bothering you or bugging you or you're getting frustrated, really hone in and focus in on kind of that 10%. And that will really help keep you on a good pathway because, yeah, death is definitely something that can really, really cause you to spiral into sort of like a negative feedback loop. And, that can happen a lot, especially when, you're trying to reconcile like, sudden or unexpected things or, and one of the huger things, which, is a topic that people do kind of talk about a little bit, but I still feel gets like a little bit underrepresented is, the impact that suicide has on like other people, right? Because again, it's like, hey, one day you're talking to this person and things seem all great. And then the next day it's like, oh, they decided to, just end things. And so kind of goes back to, there's a really great quote of it from Game of Thrones, where one of the characters said, the problem I have with death is that it's just so final, but life on the other hand is so full of possibilities. And so, for everybody that's out there, I would definitely say that, take a look at the opportunities and the possibilities that are there for you. Because again, one day it will all like, come to a bit of an end. But, if you really focus on the 10% of things that really matter, it'll really help give you a much more fulfilled and enriched life. But also it'll help with the integration of a lot of those different parts and aspects of yourself, because now you have a much more focused conduit to really drive and put your energies and your effort into that will then build out and alleviate a lot of the other 90% that doesn't necessarily matter as much, So that's the real, I think, kind of sort of lesson and takeaway there. And so, I would say that it's life is really, really, really interesting, but, that self-integration part, especially when it comes to death, not only like spiritual, but the actual physical, it's definitely something that, again, impacts us all very, very differently, and how we deal, manage, and process with that. It's very important to have your support network there for sure, because if you're just left to it on your own or on your own devices, it's real easy to kind of run off the rails and really like avoid or spiral down into that negative feedback loop. So, I kind of say like, your 2 rules of life. Rule number 1 of life, do not die, right? Rule number 2, prolong rule number 1 as long as you possibly can. So,
nice.
So try and, take your best stab at it. But really, like, it's important that you have a good support network, in your immediate circle, just because, again, this will happen. Things will come up. Things will be unexpected. And so that support network can really help you, stave off from getting drawn or sucked into more of that negative time in that negative space. Because when you realize when you come out of it, it's just like how much time you've wasted or burned being caught in a negative feedback loop when you could have been, leveraging it to, for more productive means and more productive purposes.
Yeah, man. I like how you touched on accountability there as well. The very important part, kind of running through what you were just talking about. First, you talked about accountability, very key, very important in recovery as well. Owning your side of the street, as we call it. It takes 2 to tango, but once you learn how to say, okay, even though this happened to me, maybe, or happened for me, whatever the mindset is in that moment, learning how to say, okay, I was a part of this, is where a lot of freedom comes for a lot of people, especially in recovery as well. And then, the new renegade rule, 1%, give, and then prolong that 1%. I like that. And focusing on that, the 10%, focusing on that 10% that matters. It sounds like that you experienced some moments where maybe that 90% was a lot more in your face in the moment.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, there's definitely times where it's just like nothing's going right. I feel like everything left wrong, like in center just could go wrong. But then that's where you just like kind of take you're a step back and realize your blessings and things that really are important. Where it's like, hey, my friends are still like alive and healthy. I'm still healthy, fully functioning, and I have a lot of good stuff that's still moving for me and like moving in my direction. So it's like as long as I have life, then I have another chance to go at it. And a mentor of mine said that, my resolve and the reason why I was successful is that, I told myself years ago that life will literally have to kill me for me not to achieve my goals. And so he's like, yeah, so far it's worked out pretty well. But like kind of having a little bit of that mindset and that fortitude definitely for sure helps, because again, yeah, it's real easy to get sucked into that negative side, especially when a lot of stuff is not going your way. But you realize that as long as you still have breath, like you still have an active chance. And again, things are very cyclical. So it's like, even though my grandmother passed away last night, the day before that, one of my very good friends just had his first daughter, was just born. So it's like, hey, new life, new cycle. So, again, that's it's very exciting. So, it's that sort of mixed bag of life that you get. But, it's really how you respond and react to the situation. And again, it's also knowing yourself, where sometimes it's like you need that help or that outlet, whether it's your friends, whether it's therapy, whether it's, somebody that you can, talk to, or just going up on a mountain by yourself and enjoying the view, taking that in. So that way you can kind of process and filter what's going on and what's happening. Sometimes people don't take a little bit of a pause for that, because again, there's a due time and place for everything. And so, especially when it comes to dealing with death, it can be a very overwhelming experience, and it gets frustrating, because what it does is it also tends to highlight like how powerless we can be, or how powerless we can feel, because it's like, hey, there's nothing you can do in this situation, right? No matter how much you want to bend the universe to your will, it's like there's nothing that you can do. So coming to accept that, right, and those own limitations, as well as just like, okay, how do I manage and mitigate this, and then navigate it going forward? That can be a really tough process for people. So, that's why I always encourage people, like, hey, make sure you got your support network in place. So, when you really need it, you can learn and you can leverage it and lean on it. And, those are one of those times and situations for it.
Man, you are speaking so much recovery and you're not in it, which is like beautiful to hear. That is like the first part of the program, is learning how to accept you're powerless over whatever the substance is, and not in like a helpless way, but in a way that, it's going to have the effect on you no matter what you do, no matter how much you work out or pray or whatever. And then the support system, right? That's such a big component of leveling up and becoming the best person you can be, is having people, being able to bounce ideas off people, and just ask people, hey, am I insane in this moment? That's like my biggest question. Like, am I going crazy? Sometimes I'm like, yeah, you're absolutely like off your rocker. I'm like, okay. So at least I know the answer. For both of you, as we're kind of wrapping up and getting towards the end of this hour here, for especially because there might be a group of younger guys coming to the show right now, and or maybe younger on their journey, their spiritual journey, maybe not so much age. How did you guys start to adopt that? And what was that transition like for you? Was there resistance? Was there like, no, I don't want to learn how to be grateful for what I have? Like, I just want to, blah, 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 whatever it might be. How did you guys transition out of that old way of being into the new way of being?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I wanted to just actually speak a little bit to what Josh said, because I loved so much of it. I actually posted, prior to this podcast, I posted a quote, and it said on Facebook, it says, control is a funny thing, isn't it? You don't realize how little of it you have until you actually have none of it at all. Right? Wise man, Terrence McEwick from the show Entourage. Amazing episode if you haven't watched it, but it's true, right? Like, what I've learned is I am powerless over life, right? Like, I'm just powerless over life, and escaping, drinking, drugging, whatever the thing is, it's just going to make it worse. Right. So I'm grateful that I don't have to worry about that, because I'm just not an escaper anymore. I think God blessed me with that. So that's not the conflict. The conflict is what to do with the emotions. Right. And there's a powerlessness over that as well. And the reminder that what's happening in my life is happening for me, not to me. I don't get to be a victim of my life. That doesn't make that actually doesn't make sense. And we do live in a world where we like to highlight victimhood. Let's call it for what it is, right? We like to highlight victim and praise victimhood. And that's not going to lead to a better life. That's not going to lead to growth. the kind of growth that I think a lot of people desire. So when you see it as, things happening for you, instead of being a victim and absolving yourself of responsibility, you actually get a level of personal responsibility to decide how to respond and how to react, the way that Josh said. And from a personal standpoint, the idea of having those people were huge. Josh was one of those people for me when I was literally in the dark, and I remember when I decided to even try to change my lifestyle, I lost all my friends except for two. Josh was one of those people, right? And that's why he's one of my best friends, right? Because he was there with me at my worst, and he's also been with me at my best, right? And so having those people who can see the best in you and will always talk to you as your best, even if you're not showing up as that best, is so pivotal to being able to rise above the obstacles that will inevitably come your way. Now, I just wanted to say that because that's super important what Josh said. Now, going back to your question, it was an incremental process of change. I think we get caught up, especially in today's social media world, where we always see the finished, polished product of everyone, right? And we hate to look. We love to look at the before and after, but we hate to see the in between, right? And we rarely like to see the in between because that's when it becomes real. That's when it's like, oh, that's what they had to do. I don't know, right? And I will tell you, just from personal experience, any transformation that can be made, it may look dramatic from your vantage point, but it's not always dramatic. It's never really dramatic from the person who's in the transformation. It started from day one. That started with one simple action that they then probably repeated, over and over again. And that's why I always say there's magic in there's magic in compounded effort, right? And so, my simple thing of making the change, I just had this idea in my head that I just wasn't a person of integrity. I didn't do the things that I said. And because of that, how can I be trusted? How can I have a wife who trusts me, or friends who can see me reliable, or have clients that can find me to be the person that they need me to be, right? As much as I could probably maintain appearances, at some point the house of cards are going to fall. So I had to rebuild from a place of integrity. And so what I decided to do was I decided to make my bed. That was the first thing I just made a commitment to do, was every morning I'd make my bed. So I'd wake up. Oftentimes my wife was still asleep. So I would just make my side of the bed, right? And then eventually once she would get out of bed, I go in and I do her side too, because she rarely made the bed. She makes it more now, but
that'd be really funny if you just didn't do her side, you were both out. You just only did.
It was just a mess, Yeah. But the first day I did that, and I remember going back, to bed, that night, and there was such a sense of satisfaction, not just because it felt like I was walking into a hotel room, right, where the bed was already made, but it was a realization that I did what I said. I said I was going to make my bed. I did it. And now I get to reap the rewards of going into a well-made bed. And that then sparked the idea of, what else can I do? What else can I say that I can do, right? And so then it became, let me wake up a little bit earlier. Let me do some push-ups as a form of exercise. Let me replace one non-healthy meal with a healthy meal. Let me journal. Let me meditate. Let me pray. Let me find something that could be useful to someone else. Maybe I can learn something new that I can then share with other people. It started to just grow over time, and now it's become this daily rhythm where it's just, I include cold exposure into that. I include water inside of that. I include talking to a stranger inside of that, and it just built and built and built. And it was just 1%. I decided to focus on one thing that can improve my life by 1%, only spending 1% of my day. And 1% of your day is 15 minutes, right? So that was my process of getting from where I was to where I am today, right? And the compound effect now becomes exponential because I've been doing this for a while now. And, you know, whatever polished product you see right now is not even close to the polished product that I believe it can become. But it all starts with day one, right? It's deciding that you're not going to do it one day, that you're going to decide that it's day one. And you're going to start doing that one thing. And it doesn't require a lot of time, and just seeing the little bit of that results, feeling the sense of fulfillment of having done what you said you were going to do to yourself, not to anyone else, because this isn't about anyone else. This is about you and integrity with yourself, and making the choice to repeat that process over and over again. Now, my wife, I didn't have to tell her she can trust me. I had to show her that I could trust myself, and then do that repeatedly for her to then realize that she can trust me.
Yeah.
That took years to get to. It wasn't like an overnight situation, right? But now we don't have to think about it. She totally trusts me, right? And so it's little things like that that compound over time that make a difference. And so if you're listening, you know, don't think of it as, oh my gosh, like I'll never get there, because you won't get there tomorrow. You won't get there today, but you can get closer if you take one step. And that's really what matters.
Absolutely, Thomas. Baby steps, right? You can't, and I think you're so right on your first point. You know, you see the videos of the how to make $1 million, whatever, and you watch it and it's like 30 seconds long. And you're just like, okay, so it should take 30 seconds. I follow these instructions. Why am I not a millionaire? So
yeah,
and we're all victim to it. I mean, we put content out there like too, like how to quit marijuana, and you say, okay, do this, this, and this. Well, I'm still smoking marijuana. Like, what the fuck? Yeah. And so just like you said, it's baby steps, hundreds and thousands and millions of steps over a prolonged period. That's going to compound, just like with investing. Josh, you're an expert in that. With investing, right? It's you don't just like put $1 in and all of a sudden it becomes $1 million. It just slowly creeps up over time. Now, sometimes you can get lucky and stuff, but
totally, it's simple, right? Like that's the thing that sometimes we fail to accept, is that the process to prosperity is actually really simple. Doesn't mean that it's easy. It's not easy, right? No. Like if you were to double a penny for 30 days, I forget the number, but it's like well over $2 million. If you were to double a penny every day, it's 2 million, something I think it's $2 million. Someone look it up, right? but like it looks so simple. Why don't we all do this? Right? It's because it's not easy, you know? And so you can learn the secret to life and prosperity and success in 30 seconds, but it's not going to take 30 seconds to get there. I think it can take 30 seconds to make a decision to get there, you know, but it's not easy. And I think if it was easy, I think fewer people would pursue it.
Yes.
Because of the ease of access, you know? So I think it's something that really builds character in the person, right? In their pursuit of that thing. But they have to trust themselves and their integrity and their discipline to get there. And that's where then we go back to the inner battle between the ego and the soul, right? Because the ego is definitely not into discipline. It's not into growth. It's not into consistency of that type. It's not into breaking outside your comfort zone, right? And so that's where the challenge exists.
You think about a woman too, and Josh, and we'll go hop over to you. For women, for dating, for example, you know, the girl that's super easy is not high on the. She's not a girl you want to wipe up. Let's just say like that. So just like with except for maybe the renegade, but
you know, may have to counteract that argument. But no,
touche.
She might be great to date. She might be great to date. You know,
she might be great to date, right? But yeah, you know, just like
I know the best relationships I ever had. They're all real. Like the best relationships I ever had, they're all like really easy. You know, it's like we vibe, we gel. So it's like it depends on how you define easy, right? But no, I meant like
different podcast. I'm in the not like easy, like, you know, she hops. Oh, she just came out of your friend's room. Oh, how about you? No, not big kind of easy. The analogy I was thinking of is like a death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Yeah.
You die slowly. Life gets worse and worse over time. Like for addiction example, it's not one drink, it's thousands of drinks over a prolonged period. But the opposite can be true, right? You can have life by 1,000 little wins. So that's such a big piece of advice, Thomas, to focus on the little wins every day and get as many as you can. Making the bed, absolutely. Doing a gratitude journal, eating a healthy meal. I'm into all that. Going to the gym, and again, I've been on this journey of self-improvement for like almost 8 years now, and I've done pretty much the same thing every day for these 8 years. Get up, try to eat healthy, work out, meditate, journal a little bit, maybe, try to do the right by the people around me. And it's just over and over again. And I'm sitting here today, still have a lot of work to do, but I've made a lot of progress. And it all started with that one choice. When I remember just being alone in my room, I was like sleeping on a mattress just on a floor. I was like, I got to change something. I'm going to change like tomorrow. and I made that choice to do so. So for you, Josh, I can't remember the question actually, because we've got so much deepness. Okay, cool.
Oh, can I interrupt for a second? Because someone on the YouTube tried to call me out about doubling a penny, right? It said big cap. And I appreciate it, right? Because I wasn't 100% sure, but I knew it was in the millions. If you look it up, 1 penny doubled every day over 30 days equates to $5,368,709.12. And so I just wanted to clarify, because when you hear it, it doesn't make sense. And I think if you look it up, doubling a penny, you'll see so many blog posts of people saying, I didn't believe it, but then I did the calculation. So you're not wrong, bro, for thinking that was a big cap. But it's sometimes what we think is more complicated than it really is, right? It really does show you like it can be that simple, right? The question is, why haven't more of us done it, right? And then if we dig into that, then we actually can see some of the inner truth around what's holding us back from the life that we want.
Yes. Oh, amen. Yeah. Way to challenge the professional MJ.
I appreciate it, bro, because like we got to do that, right? You got to question what you got to question it, and then once you see it, now you can't unsee it. Now the question is, what do you get to do with that, right? And it may not necessarily be about doubling a penny, right? But where else in your life are you questioning the simplicity of things that if you just gave it a real shot and disciplined yourself, you could get to, you know? Mm-hmm. Hopefully that opened up some possibilities for you, bro.
Yeah. And to answer your, which is an excellent point there. I'll answer your question, Joel, because I think we probably have like a couple of chats here. I think there's one question there that we should probably address. But to answer your question about, for the younger guys, right, that are just starting out, or again, wherever you may be, but if you're kind of find yourself at the beginning part, I think Thomas really summed it up of you really have to focus and shift your mindset and understand that, again, life is not happening to you, but it's happening for you. Right. Mm-hmm. And so all of the challenges or things that are, you're facing, those are things that are happening for you to morph you into that better person that you're supposed to be. And so if you just carry that simple switch in your mindset, that'll frame everything else up and then will help carry you through on all the other stuff. Because again, it's really, really hard to, understand that, like, if life is constantly happening to you, then you're doing the day in, the day out, the grind, the this, the that, the other, the whatever. Your perception of it is always going to hold you back or be wearing you down or be stressing you out. But if you really make that shift to, like, this is happening for me, now everything becomes a bit more of a challenge. It becomes a bit of a game. You can even make it fun, where it's like, okay, this is happening like for me, so that way I can figure out like a creative solution, or I get to, see like what the potential is, because there's nothing more awesome than you get a challenge that just seems at first like so overwhelming, and then you really find out like what you're capable of. And like how you're able to showcase like, oh, I can do this great thing, right? So whether it's in, like your professional life, whether it's in like, especially like in your dating life, right? There's nothing better, right, than, you're at the carnival, right? And then your girl's like, oh, like, here's this weird, like, claw game for a stuffed animal. And you're like, I've never done it before in my life, but then you get it. And she just like, looks at you like, oh my gosh, like that was so awesome. You're just like, yeah, I didn't even know I was capable of that, but I could totally do it, right? So when you find out and discover these new amazing things about yourself, think of it as an opportunity to, uncover and understand some, great new things about yourself that you didn't even know or realize were there. And so, a great thing to think about is like, yeah, really don't know what you're capable of, but it'll be really exciting to find out, like, hey, what are you capable of? You know, you did something small and minor today. What about something like really big? Let's see if you can do that. So that to me is really the big thing I would say for everybody, is just make that little mind switch from this is happening to me to this is happening for me. So that way you can really, really discover, your own potential. Because again, there's a lot of things that I've been fortunate to do that, rewind the clock back 10 years ago, I didn't even think like it was even in my radar or in my tool chest. And then it's just like, in the middle of the process of like trying to go through it, you discover, oh, hey, there's this brand new superpower, new ability that I didn't even realize was there. Now it's here and I get to use it. So it's, discovering the hidden levels within yourself is one of the cool things about life.
Oh, hey, man, dude. Funny enough, I went to a carnival. I went to Six Flags this week, and it's fucking the fear I had before going was pretty strong. So just like you said, I was like, okay, this is an opportunity to, face this fear. And, we're getting on a ride and there's like a 4-year-old just like in front of me. So I'm like,
crushing it.
Oh, okay, it can't be that bad. But yeah, absolutely, man. It's like everything is an opportunity for learning. And it sounds like you have a very strong, like that is just how you operate. I can just hear it in the way you talk about it. Like you're like, that is always how I just think of situations. It's happening for me. And that is so key, because for myself, I'm still in a phase where I'm a little bit in the other way, where I still kind of have that right away, that my initial reaction can be victimhood. And I'm catching it. I'm like, this doesn't feel good. And so for anyone out there too, especially if you're quitting weed or quitting any addiction, I know there can be that strong victimhood. Like, why me? Like, why do I have to go through this? Just remember what Josh is saying. Like it may suck hard in the moment. There will be, moments of peace along the way, but it may be very difficult and challenging, but you will come out of it a better person, and you'll be so thankful that it happened. So just full of gratitude that, okay, I didn't give up on this. I'm so glad I went to Six Flags, because now I know I don't have to go for another 10 to 15 years. But I'm good. And thanks roller coasters. And it was funny because I did fear, like, it was in Mexico. So I was afraid that, one of the rides wasn't going to be properly, and just my time being on that ride was the time that it just, so there was a lot of fear there.
It's cool where it's like, again, you get to uncover like, those cool aspects about yourself, where it's like, you're Clark Kent, and then you like realize, oh, I got super strength. And then, you keep at it and you realize like, oh, I can fly now. And then like another challenge hits you, and then you're like, wait, I can shoot lasers out of my eyes now? Like, what else can I do? This is awesome, right? So it's like, again, you never really understand just that cool potential that's sitting within yourself until you're challenged, and then the occasion brings that out of you. So, a lot of people are just really underutilizing some really cool things. And so, again, you really focus in on that part, and getting that part worked out or exercise on yourself. Like, you'll be shocked, and you'll look back on yourself like, in 5 years from now, you'll be like, man, like, not to stroke my own, not to put my ego at the head of the table, but I am pretty cool. Like, I've done some really cool stuff. I didn't even realize I could do this. So
great point, Josh. And dating is such a good example for that. We'll have to say that for another podcast. But God, I mean, we've all been through it, right? I know Josh and I were talking when we were in LA, just not being good with women. And all of a sudden, like, you have like 6 dates a week, and you're just like, what the? There's almost a dissociation factor. Like, is this like my life? Like, what?
Right.
5 years ago, I was just like watching porn and like feeling lonely. It's like all of a sudden, whoa, like, holy shit. This is a really 1% life. So got beautiful stuff, guys. We'll go through some of the comments here and then answer this question. Husband, what's up, gents? Thanks for tuning in, man. Good to see you, man. And then we have the professional wingman. I'm just kidding. welcome, professional wingman. Good to see you. Joel looking like a 3.8 Harvard grad with the shades. Love the look. Thank you, my friend. Actually, 2.8 college dropout. So quite the opposite. But hey,
have the glasses. That's fine.
I'll take Clark Kent, right? We take these off. I'm just all of a sudden Superman. So appreciate that, man, and appreciate our woman, and thank you for coming in as well. It's taking accountability right there. I love it. Live in action. Just, hey, I was wrong. You are correct. I stand corrected. Love that. So, and then finally, so our big question here from Nathan Johnson. Thanks for tuning in. Question for the panel: how do you find inner motivation to make small changes when you have no purpose in life? That is a fantastic question. This is something that I work with everyone who I coach with on finding their purpose. That's almost the first thing we talk about is like, okay, what is your purpose? What is your bigger reason for quitting weed or whatever the addiction might be? What do you want for your life? And so, with working with these people, for myself, what I challenge them to do, it's just little baby steps, just like Thomas said, right? You're not going to accomplish your big goal like right away. It's going to be difficult, but if you can just start getting in the habit of doing different things, what you're going to find is you start to feel good from those things. So I think that's a real big key there. I think when people have no motivation, they think, I'm going to do all these things, I'm still going to feel no motivation. You doing those little things is going to give you dopamine hits. It's going to give you spikes of all those good feel good chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, because it's just one, like, let's just say, for example, you're not exercising. All of a sudden you start exercising 4 days a week, 3 days a week. You're going to get a runner's high. You're going to get an endorphin high. And that's going to be sometimes enough to start switching you from that like depressed state to that, okay, I get to feel happy at least a few moments a day, right? And that can be enough. So kind of really thinking of it from a biological level or a neurochemical level. You start doing these good things for yourself, eating well, you're going to be rewarded by feeling good. Same with just the whole leveling up process, getting in line with what you believe that the universe wants for you. And I'm sure the universe doesn't want you to be a degenerate, to be doing bad behaviors. So when you start doing those good behaviors, you're going to get rewarded by life. So that is what I recommend people to do, is to focus on and remember that you are going to feel good along the process. God's just not going to just punch you in the gut and be like, all right, you got to eat 2 years of just shit, go. No, he's going to, give you a little, dopamine rush here or there. So how about you guys? What are your thoughts to this question?
I would definitely say that, I'd replace the word motivation with just discipline. Because again, your motivation is always going to fluctuate, but when you build in kind of like what you're talking about, those steps, but the habits behind it, that in and of itself, like, carries you through. Cause some days you're going to be super motivated. Other days you'll be like, I do not feel like doing this whatsoever, getting out of bed, but the discipline just kind of carries you through. So really kind of the motivation there, I would just say is, just doing it for yourself, right? Just a little small improvement that's going to make your life, even if it's 1% better, just doing that little thing for yourself and making it more consistent, that will carry you through. And even if you don't necessarily have a purpose or anything figured out, you can, always create a purpose or discover it later along the way, where again, through the steps that you're doing and that you're taking and continuously going through this, you suddenly find yourself in like either different rooms or different areas or having different access to people in your life that suddenly you discover, oh, okay. So kind of going back to the Superman example, right? It's like, Superman kind of didn't really know what his real purpose was, like kind of growing up like as, kind of awkward kid that somehow discovered these like crazy superpowers. Then suddenly, right, there's a global threat or an asteroid or something that's coming, and turns out, hey, he's the only one that can actually handle this. So it's like, oh, that purpose gets revealed later on. So even if you can't see it or necessarily know what it is right now, again, taking these small steps just to improve yourself and who you are, or just improve your life in general, day to day, the purpose will kind of reveal itself, and you'll be very, very extremely happy that it did. Because again, sometimes it's not about like what's happening with you now, but this is going to come in handy for you when you really need it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? Or even 5 months from now. So think about investing in, and kind of goes back to what I said, earlier about that quote my friend sent me. Your past doesn't need you anymore, but your future does. So always keep that in your mind. Your future needs you right now. So whatever it is that you're doing today, that's what your future self is going to need, and it's going to be extremely grateful for. So if anything else, just for your future self, use that as your motivating factor.
Exactly. Like, you hit it right on the head. Make your purpose doing the little things until your purpose is revealed. Like, that's the purpose. It doesn't have to be some grand purpose. And like for my sobriety university, right? I was, I think, 4.5 years sober. I was working these delivery jobs, like nothing fancy. Kind of frustrated with where I was, but suddenly the light bulb hit, like, oh, do a YouTube channel. And now we're here 4 years later with, two amazing human beings talking about this topic. And it wouldn't have come without those hundreds of little decisions up until that moment where I was like, okay, make this choice. And let me tell you, Nathan, like when that moment hit that like this is what I'm supposed to do, it hit. And so trust that when you do those little things like we've been talking about, and you finally get that moment where of clarity where it's like, okay, this is what I'm meant to do with your life, you'll know. And you'll be so grateful that you did all those little things.
Yeah, and just to quickly follow up on your, you're welcome. But I would definitely say like you don't necessarily have to like block out those feelings. You can just learn how to channel them, right? So again, channel them and use them as motivation for yourself, and then like you'll be okay. Because again, your feelings are a natural part of you, right? So sometimes we get the feeling that, oh my gosh, we need to like fight them, and that's one thing I had to learn for myself because I used to be a deeply angry person, and then I realized like my anger actually like it can work against me if I keep fighting it, or if I integrate with myself and use to leverage it. Now it's like, okay, cool. I'm at the gym, but I'm angry. So I'm like working out like harder and going like, really putting myself through the paces. Oh, okay, great. I found a very constructive way to leverage something. So, because your feelings and emotions, they're inherently neutral. It's how we decide to enact upon them or react to them that determines whether they're constructive or they're destructive. So, don't necessarily think you have to completely block them out, bottle them up or whatnot, but just learn how to channel them constructively, where it's like, you're feeling bad or sad or whatever. You take that thing and you just say, you know what, I'm feeling this way. I'm going to use that as motivation to turn it around because I don't want to feel this way. So, you know what, today I'm just going to go walk an extra mile today, just so that I'm like doing something more better or more healthy for myself. So, learn to integrate those and channel those. And again, you will find that very amazing results can be derived from it.
Amen. Yeah, it's not about blocking out the feelings. I agree with you. It's learning to take action despite the feelings. Just like Josh said, sometimes you won't be motivated to go to the gym or to, journal, meditate, do the next right thing. Or maybe Thomas said, we've all been through it where we just don't want to do it. And it's taking action despite that. That's what builds the character. That's what builds the integrity, the confidence, which if you break down the word confidence, it's actually confidere, which is Latin, which means to trust. So as soon as I stopped looking at confidence as like, being big mad on campus and like, walking around with your chest out, to more learning how to trust myself, that's when natural confidence started to develop. And it was way more authentic too than what I believe confidence was, where, just like you said, being a loser or you're cool, like that totally went out. It's like, okay, do I trust myself or do I not trust myself? If I trust myself in the moment, great. If not, what can I do to learn how to trust myself? So embrace those feelings, Nathan. I know they suck. You can also reach out to any of us as well as to chat. We also offer coaching, which we'd be happy to, or at least whoever you resonate with more, if that's something that is in your ability to do now, definitely recommend reaching out, and one of us can help you kind of get on track and kind of get out of your own way, I guess is maybe one of the better ways to say it.
Can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
One of the best ways I've learned in today's world to build confidence is to be a person of integrity. If you do what you say, you'll build that confidence. And there's different types of confidence, just to be clear. There's the confidence, which is what you say about yourself to other people. And then there's self-confidence, which is what you say about yourself to yourself. So integrity builds self-confidence and then in turn comes out as confidence. And hopefully that makes sense. But I wanted to just speak to a couple of things that you said from like a coaching perspective. It's okay to not, first of all, like, you have a purpose in this life, right? And you may not know what it is right now, and that's okay, right? And I think there's a difference between purpose and meaning, right? Purpose is, if I were to be really frank about it, purpose is ego driven and meaning is soul driven, right? Ooh. Like, what do you want your life to mean to you? That's the question that I would ask you. What do you want your life to mean to you? And in that answer could be a little bit of the remnants of what could become your purpose. And to start from a place of inner motivation is so much harder than it is to go after external motivation. So, all the things that Joel and Josh have been talking about in terms of like going to work out, eating a healthy meal, finding ways to make more money, finding ways to be of service in your community or to your friends. These are all great opportunities for you to externally feel fulfilled and motivated from a chemical standpoint, right? With the oxytocin, the serotonin, and the dopamine and all that stuff, but also internally to have that meaning be fulfilled, right? When you feel like your meaning, and when you start to build momentum in creating a lot of those things, that's when you start to then get closer to what you may feel like your purpose is in life. And I just wanted to make sure that they share that. And I also sign on to what they're saying too. You know, it's not about blocking out feelings. I think, especially for men, like I want to make sure this is clear. And I know we're over time, but things like this have to be said. As men, we get to hear all the time that we need to ignore our feelings. And that is not true. I'm also not saying that you need to fully express your feelings either, because that is reckless and dangerous as men. We are much more capable of destructive things in our feelings than anyone else. So it's not, so I don't want you to go out there and fully express it. What I invite you to do is to learn emotional literacy, which is understanding what you're feeling, be able to identify those feelings, and be able to process them in a meaningful and productive way that's helpful for you and potentially others, right? That's the part that Josh alluded to when he talked about channeling those feelings, right? But it's hard to channel them if you don't know what they are, right? If you can't identify them, right? And so learn to identify them and be okay that these feelings are like your feelings are valid. It's a part of the human experience. So no one should be telling you to not have these feelings. What's not okay is to express them in destructive ways. So if you can learn to identify them, then you'll be able to figure out how to process that type of feeling in a way that's productive. And then the last thing I'll say is, the language is something that gets to be worked on, right? Saying that you're a loser, right? Like losers don't show up to this. Losers don't show up to this podcast, right? Losers don't ask questions that you're asking, right? You know what losers do? Losers give up. They say, fuck it. Like, I can't do this, right? That's what a loser does. A loser is someone who decides to stop playing the game, right? And if you remember back in the day when we were playing Nintendo, the only way to beat the game was to keep the game on, right? Like we didn't have a save function back in the day, right? So when we had to turn off the Nintendo, that was us giving up for that day, right? But I believe that there's people who do that for themselves in their lives. And those are who I would call losers. You're trying to shift from the mindset that you have to develop what we know as a winner's mindset, right? And you're looking for the tools. And I think that I also would say that you actually have a lot more inside of you than you probably give yourself credit for. And if you spend more time acting on those things to develop practice and experience, I think you'll get a lot closer, a lot quicker to the life that you want than you think. And as Joel said, we're all here to support you if you want that guided support that can help you get there in a structured, dialed in, fast way, and you nailed it. Your mindset is going to be the key thing that holds you back. I think most of life's performance is 80% mindset, and the 20% part is actually the acting on it. But the two have to happen, And so, taking action is the first step. And then from there, you'll be able to work on the growth, And so I'm so glad you're here. I just want to let you know that like being here is probably one of the more powerful things and motivating things that you can do today. So my action steps for you is what can you take from this podcast and act upon it either tonight or tomorrow that's going to help you get further along on your journey. And then what else are you going to take on that's going to help continue to move that needle forward for you?
Yeah. And to build on what Thomas said right there, which I thought was a very excellent point, a loser, right, or any winner out there, right? They're just a loser that just tried one more time. Because again, behind every winner was a whole bunch of losses. Like we can all tell you from our own personal examples and experiences, like, man, we've taken so many L's and have, like, been quote unquote losers. But, again, that's a very temporary situation. So, again, you're only one win away from completely like changing around that sort of focus in that area. So definitely change up a little bit of the language on how you're viewing things. And yeah, finding success monetarily, getting in shape, getting out of your own way, right? Those are things that, again, the last two that you mentioned, right? Getting out of your own way and, getting in shape, really easy, right? Just, all right, from tomorrow on, or even tonight on, I'm going to go to the gym and be consistent at that. So again, that will help keep you on the right pathway.
That's going to be the first short from this pod is we're all losers that just tried one more time. That is too good. So I think in spirit, we're going to change the color here to white because we've gone from death to life. And I think it's ceremonious as we're closing this podcast. So yeah, absolutely, Nathan. Again, just like the boy said, appreciate you coming in, and it takes courage to ask these questions and to look at yourself. And so you are absolutely on the right path, and you're going to get there, man. If you are struggling with weed, you posted that at 421, which is a sign that you're overcoming 420. So I always see that as like a ceremonious time, either like 421. That's just my kind of marijuana thing, but yeah, dude. So we actually do got to hop here. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been a fantastic stream. Josh has some plumbing things he has to deal with, which is happening for him.
Yes, exactly. Shower exploding. It's happening for me.
He asked for this, actually. I think he purchased. He's like, please. So guys, thank you so much. If you want to connect with any of us, you can down in the our links below, Instagram for all of us. And then we all have YouTube channels as well, which will be linked in the description. If you want coaching like Thomas has said, and we talked about, we more than invite you to reach out and see if we'd be a good fit for you. And if there's anything we can do to help you along your journey, that's what we're here for. We've been through it. We made the mistakes, so you don't have to. And then we all help each other out anyway. So we all get coached. We all get support from other people. So we are practicing what we preach. And with that, guys, have a great week. May you have a great life, and just, take this energy you heard today and transfer it into creating the best version of yourself. So